Well, welcome everybody. This is the first of our little mini lecture videos that you're going to get used to seeing in this online class. And this is kind of the way that we do these online classes is I've got lots of information posted for you in these learning modules, including these little mini lecture videos that I will put up at the very, very beginning of every module for you to take a look at. You can go back and watch these videos as many times as you like. And they're just a great way for me to not just give you the information about the class like in a PowerPoint slide or PowerPoint presentation or like some written notes, but also too to have a little FaceTime, so to speak, with you and for you to hear my voice and hear me also lecture and give you the information just like we would in a normal classroom. So let me start with a couple of just housekeeping items before we talk a little bit about this counseling approach called behavior theory. Number one, make sure you have gone and found the course syllabus for our class. We're just getting started, so you want to make sure, of course, that you have the class syllabus and you know kind of how everything is organized and kind of how it's going. Also, too, go and find the welcome video that I made for you, very similar to this one, that gives you a little introduction to the class and kind of an overview of how the class works and some announcements and those kinds of things. Make sure you view that as well too. And then also too, in this module, so this video that you're watching is a part of module number 1. And you'll also notice, if you haven't already, that there's several other things that I post for you in this module. In addition to these little mini lecture videos, I've got a PowerPoint presentation loaded for you that I want you to go and look at as well too. Many of you are used to, especially if you're in class with me, you're used to my PowerPoint presentations and seeing the slides. And this little mini lecture video goes right alongside the PowerPoint slides. So take a look at those if you want to and put these two together, and they're a great way to kind of learn as well too. And then also too, one of the things I also always provide for you, this module looks like this. I always provide for you what I call my lecture notes. Lecture notes are just usually 3 or 4 pages that I also provide for you as a PDF or a Word document, which is really just the written lecture, so to speak, and it also goes along with this little video as well. So I'll give you several ways. I'm giving you the content, the information in this class, several different ways. Here through this video, also through the PowerPoint presentation, also through the lecture notes. And so kind of trying to cover all my bases. So make sure that you look at all of them together. That's how you're going to get the most out of the class and get the information that you need. So there's that. Also too, there is a written assignment posted. There's actually 2 written assignments now posted for you. The Module 1 homework assignment and the TV show / textbook review assignment. So you've got 2 written assignments already posted for you. Go find the outlines for that assignment. Watch the intro video, look at the syllabus for the due dates to get all that under control, and that way you can stay on top of everything. So let's kind of get started. This is the Behavior Modification and Cognitive Disorder class. And I told you during the intro video that I teach this class very similar to a counseling theories class, because that's really what we talk about in this class. There are 2 helping approaches that we're going to focus on in this class. One is an older approach called behavior theory, and then the other is a little bit newer called cognitive behavior theory. So if you look at the syllabus, you see that about the first 2/3 of the class, we cover behavior theory, and then later in the class, we cover cognitive behavior theory. Both of these theories are examples of just several. There are many different helping approaches that are out there for us as helpers to draw from. Counseling theories are just guidelines for how we can work with our clients to help them to overcome and deal with and address whatever issues or struggles that they are having. So if you're a student in a human services program like you are, it's always good to have a good idea of what are some of the different approaches that we have found through the years are helpful for us as we work with our clients. And so it's good to be familiar with a wide range of those different theories. And in this class, we're going to focus and kind of drill down, so to speak, on 2, behavior theory and cognitive behavior theory. A little bit of a history lesson. If you've ever taken a counseling theories class with me, you've heard some of this. So what we call in America, the US, social services and traditional counseling and social work as a profession is about 100 or 150 years old. It's actually not that old. Obviously, people have been helping each other with problems for years. But what we call social services, what we call counseling, what we call social work has really just been around for about 125, 150 years or so. And one of our forefathers in counseling and social work was a man named Sigmund Freud. You're familiar with Freud's name. Freud is credited with lots and lots of things. And one of the things that Freud is credited with is he is credited with developing what we would call the first organized helping approach, called a counseling theory. It was called psychoanalytic theory. Maybe you've studied psychoanalytic theory. It is the oldest approach that is out there available to us. It was the first one that was developed. Today we still use lots of core ideas of Freud's psychoanalytic theory. And if you take your counseling theories class, DAC 1311, you study about Freud and what psychoanalytic theory teaches. For about the first 50 years of counseling and social work and social services, that theory, psychoanalytic theory, was the only theory really developed. It was the only helping approach. There was just one helping approach for many, many years, Freud's psychoanalytic theory. That theory is complicated, has lots of ideas, but here's the basic idea. Freud taught that human nature, human behavior, human emotions are complex, and the human mind is complicated. Human behavior is mysterious. Who knows why we do what we do? There are no answers to lots of our questions when it comes to ourselves, according to Freud. We are complicated, complex beings. A large part of our mind, according to Freud, is unconscious, and part of it is conscious. So we're not always fully aware and self-aware of who we are and why we are and what we're doing. And Freud proposed an idea, lots of ideas, that generally just says that as people, men and women, our problems, our strengths, our resources, complicated and complex. And for about 50 years or so, when the field of psychology first started, that was kind of how we all worked with people, right? And then other people began to come along later, 50 years or so later. And they began to take Freud's ideas and they began to build on them and to expand them. Other people came along, men like Carl Rogers, men like B.F. Skinner, men like Alfred Adler came along. And they said, you know what, part of what Freud is saying is true, but is it true for everybody? Is it true in every situation? And they began to develop their own ideas, some of them similar to Freud's ideas, others of them very different from Freud's ideas. And they began to realize that actually there's a number of different ways that we can approach human behavior. There's not just one. There's all kinds of different ideas and ways that are somewhat valid. And so several different ideas begin to be developed over time. You're familiar maybe with the man, his name is B.F. Skinner. Skinner is someone you may learn about in your psychology class. I remember when I was a psychology student many, many years ago, I learned about Skinner because I watched a video of how Skinner, back in like the 1940s and 50s and 60s, would take rats and he would take pigeons and he could teach them complicated behaviors like how to run a maze and how to press a bar 17 times, for example, to get a little sugar pellet. And he could teach them these complicated behaviors and then he could unteach them the same way using reinforcers and punishers, using consequences, usually food, to motivate them. And he began to realize, you know what? Human behavior is not always complicated. Is it possible that as men and women, sometimes our behavior is somewhat predictable? It's not always complicated and mysterious. Is it possibly true that there are times when human behavior is clear, it is identifiable, it is measurable, it is somewhat predictable? And Skinner and others, they were called behaviorists because they were more interested in the outward observable behavior. Freud was interested in the internal, the mind, the emotions, and all of the deeper kinds of things. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. All that's important and good. Men like Skinner and other folks came along and they said, you know what, sometimes human behavior is not that complex. It's more basic, it's more simple. And they proposed through the years a theory that today we call behavior theory, that is the focus of our class. And it kind of proposed more of a straightforward, a little bit more black and white approach to looking at human behavior. Now here's a key thing. Skinner and all of those guys, and in this class included, we're not going to ignore what Freud taught us, because Freud taught us a lot. We're not going to ignore and say that at times human behavior can be complex and complicated, because it can. But not always. And so one of the things I have found in my work as a professional, as a counselor, is that sometimes some problems have somewhat simple solutions. And that's true in all kinds of situations. There are other times when there are not simple solutions. It just kind of depends on the situation. And so when you work with people in social services or social work or counseling or whatever, you got to have lots of different tools in your toolbox. Okay? You can't just have all of Freud's ideas, because those are helpful in some situations, but not in every situation. So you got to have some other tools in your toolbox. And so that's why it's good to be knowledgeable of and understand a wide range of different theories that are out there, and including behavior theory. So we're going to kind of focus on behavior theory in this class. So what I want to do in the rest of this video very, very quickly, if you've looked at the lecture notes, what I like to do whenever I study different helping approaches, which is what we're doing in these first couple of modules in this class with behavior theory, is I kind of like to boil them down and just make them real basic. Every single theory has some core ideas that if you can kind of wrap your mind around, so to speak, you kind of got an idea of kind of what the theory teaches. And to me, there are 5. With behavior theory, there are 5 core ideas that you really can't understand behavior theory unless you kind of have a good handle on these 5 core ideas or concepts related to behavior theory. So that's what we're going to focus on just real quickly. I want you to become familiar with what are those 5 ideas, and let's just summarize them and let's work our way through them very, 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 very simply. Here's the core idea. Here's core idea number 1. Core idea number 1 is this. The core idea of behavior theory number 1 is this. Behavior theory says it's focused on behavior because it's called behavior theory. And what it teaches us and what it says is that human behavior has 3 forms. Human behavior has 3 forms. Human behavior is what we say, what we do, and what we think. Verbal behavior, physical behavior, cognitive behavior. Human behavior is what comes out of our mouths when as I'm speaking to you right now, this verbal conversation I'm having. Behavior theory would say, yeah, Glenn is behaving as he's speaking, because as we speak, that is a form of how we act, so to speak. So human behavior involves what we say, verbal behavior. It also involves what we do, physical behavior, with what we do with our bodies or what we do with movement and motion. Physical behavior is also too a part of human behavior. Human behavior is also what we think. And we're going to talk a lot more about cognitive behavior. You're familiar with the term cognitive, maybe. The term cognitive or cognition just means thinking. And so we're going to talk a lot more later this semester about this little bit of a newer idea that says that what we say to ourselves, our cognitive behavior, is also a part of what we do. So human behavior has 3 forms. It's a long story, but when behavior theory was developed, at the time there was a lot of controversy about, well, what is behavior? Believe it or not. Well, what is behavior? Well, if I yell at someone, or if I'm sitting still on the couch, or if I'm asleep, is that behavior? When am I behaving, right? And so Skinner and others came along and they developed, number 1, this first core idea that behavior theory focuses on this helping approach, focuses on human behavior. And not just human behavior, but identifying, well, what is human behavior? Human behavior has 3 forms: physical, verbal, and cognitive. It's what we say, it's what we do, and what we think. Now, underneath that, let me give you another definition or 2. One of the things I also want you to be familiar with too is these 2 terms: overt behavior and covert behavior. So that kind of also falls under this first core idea. The term overt means out in the open or observable. The way I remember it is the word overt starts with the letter O. So overt means outward or observable. Some of our behavior is considered overt behavior because it is easily observable to people around us. It is out in the open. Well, that would include our verbal behavior and our physical behavior, because our physical and verbal behavior is out in the open. It is easily observable to people around us, so therefore it is considered overt behavior. You can observe me and can determine what I'm doing. I can observe you and determine what you're doing and saying. And so part of our behavior is outward, or it is overt. So overt behavior is considered outward, and that would be physical and verbal. But then there's also this term covert. You probably have heard the term covert. The concept of covert is just the opposite of overt. The word covert starts with the letter C. And the way I always remembered covert means covered up or secret or just covered up, basically. So covert behavior means behavior that you and I engage in that is not easily observable to others. Well, what kind of behavior is that? That would be our cognitive behavior. So our cognitive behavior is also sometimes called covert behavior because it's not easily observable to someone else. You cannot look at me and tell what I'm thinking. You can't. You're not able to observe in me my thinking. You can look at me and observe my physical and verbal behavior. You can tell if I'm speaking, and if you're close enough, you can hear what I'm saying. And you can look at my body and see what I'm doing with my physical motions. That's why verbal behavior and physical behavior is considered overt. It's out in the open. But you can't really see easily. Someone else cannot easily see what I'm thinking, my cognitive behavior. It's internal. Only I can see it and observe it. We'll talk more about that a little bit later in this class. So for that reason, our cognitive behavior is also called covert behavior. So overt behavior, outward and observable. That's physical and verbal. Covert behavior means covered up. That's our cognitive behavior. So this first core idea, really, really simple. Human behavior has three forms. It's what we say, it's what we do, it's what we think. It's our physical behavior, our verbal behavior, and our cognitive behavior. And then kind of underneath that, there is this thing, the difference between overt and covert. Overt behavior is our physical and verbal behavior because it's out in the open and people can easily observe it within us. Our covert behavior is that internal cognitive behavior. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a secret, it just means it's not easily observable to other people. So we oftentimes use the term covert to refer to that. So that's important to have both of those ideas, the three forms of human behavior and the difference between covert and overt. Both understanding both of those is really, really important with this first core idea of behavior theory. So we're going to stop right there for this first video. I gave you a little bit of introduction to behavior theory, a little bit of history, and we covered core idea number one. Human behavior has three forms. The next video, we're going to cover a couple more, three ideas. We're going to cover 5 of them total in this first module. Make sure you got a good handle on all 5 of them as we kind of get our class started. So I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.